The colony thrived on the edge of explored space, a symbol of humanity's resilience and ambition. It was a place of peace, built by pioneers who believed in the promise of a new future far from the core worlds and the political webs of the Galactic Council. Families worked the land, scientists expanded the boundaries of human knowledge, and communities flourished under the distant stars. It was an idyllic world, untouched by the constant strife that plagued many other colonies, a place where hope had taken root. That hope shattered in a single day. Without warning, the Galactic Council unleashed their full military might upon the colony. Massive warships appeared in the skies, blotting out the sun, their engines humming with cold, mechanical precision. The first blasts rained down, leveling entire cities in seconds. Homes, hospitals, schools, nothing was spared. The ground trembled as explosions ripped through the landscape, leaving craters where vibrant communities once stood. Civilians ran in every direction, but there was no escape. The Council's forces swept over the colony like a tidal wave, methodically eradicating any trace of human life. Within hours, millions were dead. Entire families were wiped out, reduced to ash beneath the Council's relentless bombardment. Those few who survived did so by sheer luck or the quick thinking of hiding in the wilderness. They witnessed the horror unfold, helpless as everything they had built was annihilated. The screams of the dying, the thunder of the Council's weapons, the acrid smell of burning, they were seared into the minds of the survivors, who huddled in caves or the wreckage of buildings, praying for the nightmare to end. When the attack finally ceased, the survivors emerged to a landscape transformed into a graveyard. The grief was palpable, but it quickly turned to something sharper. Rage. This wasn't a random act of violence, or an unfortunate consequence of war. It was deliberate, a message sent by the Galactic Council to humanity: stay in your place or face obliteration. The survivors understood this, and they knew that no help was coming from the human core worlds. They were on their own. But not entirely. Captain Alexander Reed had once been a legend among humanity's military ranks. He led countless successful campaigns against the Council in a war that had long since ended, a war that had seen humanity pushed to the brink before peace was reluctantly brokered. Reed had been presumed dead for years, lost in a final mission that had cost him everything: his crew, his ship, and his place in the galaxy. But Reed had survived, though the man who now stood before the survivors was a far cry from the idealistic hero they once knew. He was hardened, driven by the ghosts of his past, and now, by the massacre of the colony. When Reed reappeared, it was as if a part of humanity's fighting spirit had been reignited. His presence alone was enough to rally the survivors. He had not come to mourn but to fight. Reed had seen the devastation left in the Council's wake, and he was determined to ensure that their crime did not go unanswered. He gathered the remnants of the colony's military, engineers, and anyone capable of wielding a weapon or piloting a ship. In the days following the massacre, they worked tirelessly to salvage what they could from the ruins. Abandoned Council tech, scavenged weapons, and damaged ships were repurposed into tools of war. Reed spoke to the survivors not as a commander, but as one of them, someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. He laid out a plan, not for survival, but for revenge. The Galactic Council believed they had crushed the colony and silenced its people. Reed vowed to make sure the Council paid for their arrogance, that the galaxy would know humanity wasn't broken. It was preparing for war. The guerrilla fleet formed in the shadow of the ruins, a motley collection of warships held together by determination and ingenuity. What they lacked in numbers, they made up for in resolve. Reed's strategy wasn't to confront the Council in open battle. They were too few for that. Instead, he devised a plan to strike where the Council least expected it. The fleet would rely on stealth, using hit-and-run tactics to dismantle the Council's supply lines, sabotage their outposts, and bleed their forces dry over time. One of the key elements of their strategy was the advanced stealth technology they had managed to develop. Reed, with the help of some of the brightest engineers from the colony, had designed ships capable of evading the Council's surveillance networks. These stealth ships became the fleet's most potent weapon, allowing them to move unseen through enemy territory, striking without warning, and disappearing before the Council could mount a defense. The first target was a small military outpost on the planet Darren V, a strategic point in the Council's supply chain. It was lightly guarded, and the element of surprise was on the side of Reed's fleet. As they descended on the planet, their stealth technology rendered them invisible to the outpost's sensors. The Council soldiers stationed there had no idea what was coming. The first explosions tore through their defenses, ripping apart the communication relays and weapons depots. Chaos ensued as the outposts scrambled to respond, but by the time they realized they were under attack, it was too late. Reed led the charge, coordinating the strike with surgical precision. The outpost fell within minutes, its remaining soldiers either surrendering or fleeing in panic. The psychological impact of the attack was immediate. The Council had grown complacent, secure in their belief that humanity was too weak to pose a real threat. But the victory at Darren V shattered that illusion. Word spread quickly throughout the Council's ranks. Humanity was fighting back, and they were using tactics the Council had never encountered before. After the battle, Reed stood before his fighters, their faces hardened by loss but burning with the fire of victory. He didn't need to say much. The message was clear: this was just the beginning. The Council had killed millions of their people, and now, humanity was going to make them pay for every life lost. Reed's leadership had given the survivors something they desperately needed: purpose. They weren't just a band of fugitives anymore. They were soldiers in a war for their species' survival. And with every strike, the Council would feel the consequences of their actions. Humanity would rise from the ashes, not as victims, but as the force that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The war effort against the Galactic Council intensified with every passing day. Under Captain Reed's leadership, the guerrilla fleet began to gain traction, launching coordinated strikes across the Council's territories. What started as small, surgical attacks on outposts and supply lines evolved into larger and more daring operations. Reed's forces were no longer merely an annoyance to the Council. They had become a symbol of resistance, inspiring whispers of hope among other oppressed species in the galaxy. The Council's dominance was being challenged, and their response was brutal. The fleet's tactics remained focused on stealth and surprise, utilizing the advanced technology they had developed to strike without warning and retreat before the Council could retaliate. Each successful mission further emboldened the guerrilla fighters, as they crippled the Council's supply chains, sabotaged military installations, and disrupted communications. The Council's fleets grew larger and more desperate in their attempts to crush the rebellion. They deployed more ships, more soldiers, and more resources, but the guerrilla fighters were always one step ahead. The Council's arrogance blinded them to the true nature of the threat they were facing. They continued to view humanity as weak, underestimating both their resilience and their capacity for ingenuity in war. As the war effort expanded, Reed began to notice strange anomalies during their missions. Certain members of his fleet demonstrated exceptional combat abilities, reflexes faster than should have been possible, strength beyond human limits. These individuals were among the survivors from the original colony, but Reed had never seen them exhibit such traits before. He dismissed it as the natural consequence of rigorous training and the will to survive. That is, until the attack on Zaner Station. Zaner Station was a heavily fortified Council base, located in a strategic position along one of the main routes supplying the Council's core worlds. It was the perfect target for Reed's fleet, a chance to deliver a major blow to the Council's infrastructure. The operation was carefully planned, with every detail accounted for. The attack began like any other, swift, brutal, and devastating. The guerrilla fighters tore through the station's defenses, disabling the base's weapons and communications within minutes. Victory seemed inevitable. But as Reed and his team pushed deeper into the station, they stumbled upon something they hadn't anticipated. Hidden away in a secured section of the base was a laboratory, one that appeared far too advanced to belong to a mere military outpost. Curious and cautious, Reed ordered his team to investigate. What they found inside would change the course of the war. The laboratory was filled with medical equipment, research terminals, and containment units. In one of the units, they discovered a human colonist, unconscious and hooked up to a series of machines. It was clear that this person had been experimented on. There were visible modifications to their body, scars that indicated invasive procedures. Reed's team began uncovering files and logs that detailed the horrifying truth. The Galactic Council had been conducting illegal genetic experiments on the human colonists, using them as test subjects for a new kind of weapon. These experiments were designed to create super soldiers, humans with enhanced physical abilities, stronger, faster, and more resilient than any ordinary soldier. The logs revealed that the Council had been working on this project for years, long before the massacre of the colony. The destruction of the colony had not been an act of punishment or control, as Reed had believed. It had been a cover-up, a way to erase the evidence of their crimes. The massacre was never about sending a message. It was about silencing the victims of their experiments. As the team searched through the files, the truth became even more disturbing. Some of the super soldiers had escaped the laboratory during the chaos of the attack. Unbeknownst to Reed, they had found their way to his fleet and joined the guerrilla fighters. The individuals he had noticed with exceptional abilities weren't just highly trained, they were the result of the Council's experiments. His own men were unknowingly part of the very program he was fighting to destroy. The revelation hit Reed hard. These men and women, some of whom he had grown to trust and rely on, were not entirely who they thought they were. They had been altered, their bodies changed in ways they couldn't comprehend. The realization sparked immediate tension within the fleet. Word of the discovery spread quickly, and soon, the fighters were divided. Some saw the super soldiers as an abomination, a reminder of the Council's atrocities. Others believed they were a necessary asset, a weapon that could be turned against their enemies. Reed found himself at the center of an ethical dilemma. He had built this fleet on the principles of justice and vengeance for the fallen colony. Now, he had to decide whether to continue using these super soldiers, knowing that their creation was the result of the Council's illegal and immoral actions. Were they still human? Did it matter if they were fighting for the same cause? Reed struggled with these questions, knowing that any decision he made would have lasting consequences. The fleet was now fractured. Some of his closest allies, people who had fought alongside him since the beginning, began to question the morality of their mission. Was it right to use the Council's creations to achieve their goals? Were they any better than the enemy they were fighting? The debate raged within the fleet, and for the first time, cracks appeared in their unity. In the midst of this internal conflict, Reed delved deeper into the Council's hidden agenda. As he pieced together more information from the laboratory files, he uncovered the true scope of the Council's operations. The massacre had been meticulously planned, not just to cover up the genetic experiments, but to prevent a larger truth from coming to light. The Council feared that if the galaxy learned of their actions, it would destabilize their power and lead to rebellion on a scale they could not control. The experiments on the human colonists were just one part of a much larger conspiracy. The Council had been conducting similar experiments across the galaxy, targeting different species and modifying them to create an army of loyal, enhanced soldiers. But with each experiment, they risked exposure. The destruction of the colony was a calculated move to eliminate the evidence, and humanity had been their most dangerous experiment yet. Reed now understood the full extent of the Council's corruption. They were not merely oppressors, they were manipulators, using the lives of countless beings to maintain their grip on power. This knowledge strengthened his resolve. The fight was no longer just about avenging the fallen or freeing humanity from the Council's control. It was about exposing the truth and dismantling the very foundations of the Council's regime. As the fleet prepared for their next mission, Reed knew that the war had entered a new phase. The discovery of the experiments had changed everything. The fleet's unity was fragile, but their purpose had never been clearer. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for justice, for freedom, and for the right to determine their own future. The Council had turned humans into weapons, but now those weapons would be used against them. Reed gathered his fighters, both the unaltered and the super soldiers, and made his decision clear. They would continue to fight together, united in their cause. The Council had underestimated humanity once again, and now they would pay the price for their arrogance. The war was far from over, but Reed was determined to ensure that when it ended, the Council's reign of terror would be nothing more than a memory. As the guerrilla war raged on, the Council's desperation became more apparent. Their responses grew increasingly erratic, deploying overwhelming force where it wasn't needed, while failing to protect critical assets that should have been impenetrable. Reed and his team noticed this shift but couldn't quite understand why it was happening. Their tactics hadn't changed, yet the Council's behavior suggested something deeper was unraveling behind the scenes. The breakthrough came during an interception of high-level Council communications. At first, the data seemed routine, standard military protocols and reports from the outer sectors. But buried within the encoded messages, one particular exchange caught the attention of Reed's top intelligence officer. It hinted at something more than just military strategy, referencing the central link and ensuring compliance among the member species. The phrasing was vague, but the implications were clear. The Council was using more than brute force to maintain its dominance. They were manipulating entire populations on a scale previously unimaginable. Reed had his suspicions but needed proof. He ordered his intelligence teams to dig deeper into the intercepted communications. The more they uncovered, the more horrifying the truth became. The Council had implemented a vast, galaxy-spanning mind control network. For centuries, they had been subtly influencing, even outright controlling, the populations of their member species. The Council's true power wasn't just in their fleets or their armies, but in the invisible chains they had wrapped around the minds of millions. This network had been built over generations, its reach extending into every corner of the galaxy. Entire species had been manipulated into loyalty, their free will stripped away without them even knowing. Those who resisted or showed signs of independence were either eliminated or mentally subdued, ensuring total compliance with the Council's regime. The mind control network explained much of the Council's seemingly unshakable grip on power. The loyalty of their allies, the fearlessness of their soldiers, it was all artificial, an elaborate illusion built on centuries of deceit. Reed understood immediately that the only way to defeat the Council was to dismantle this network. Destroying their fleets and bases would mean nothing if they could continue to control the minds of billions. But tearing down such a vast system presented a monumental challenge. If they acted recklessly, they risked causing catastrophic mental damage to the populations under the Council's control. Billions of lives could be lost, not just physically, but mentally, turned into empty shells without their will or identity intact. The weight of this decision bore heavily on Reed. He knew they couldn't ignore the network, but the stakes had never been higher. The key to humanity's victory, and the freedom of the galaxy, lay in their ability to destroy this mind control system without harming the very people they were trying to liberate. Reed and his inner circle worked day and night to devise a plan. They would have to strike at the heart of the Council's power, the central hub of the mind control network, located deep within the Council's capital. It was a heavily fortified world, surrounded by fleets and planetary defenses designed to repel any invasion. The mission would be dangerous, likely a one-way trip for many of them. But Reed knew that this was the only way to break the Council's hold once and for all. The plan was bold, perhaps even reckless, but it was the best chance they had. Reed divided his forces into two teams. One would engage the Council's fleets in a massive diversionary assault, drawing their attention away from the true target. Meanwhile, Reed and a smaller team would infiltrate the central hub on the surface of the capital planet. Their objective was to locate the core of the mind control network and disable it without triggering a catastrophic collapse. As the guerrilla fleet launched their attack, the Council's forces responded with overwhelming force. Battles raged across space, ships colliding in a storm of fire and destruction. The diversion worked. Most of the Council's defenses shifted toward the outer battle, leaving a narrow window for Reed's infiltration team to make their move. Using their advanced stealth technology, they slipped past the remaining defenses and landed on the capital. Inside the central hub, the team encountered fierce resistance. The Council had anticipated some sort of attack, and their elite forces were waiting. The fighting was intense, every step forward costing them dearly. Reed led the charge, determined to reach the core of the network no matter the cost. His years of experience, his unyielding drive for justice, propelled him through the chaos, guiding his team through the labyrinth of corridors toward their final objective. When they finally reached the network's core, it was unlike anything they had ever seen. The sheer complexity of the system was staggering. Massive servers housed the neural data of countless species, all linked through a vast network of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. The control over minds wasn't just a matter of flipping a switch, it was a living, breathing system that had to be carefully dismantled. Time was running out. The Council's forces were closing in, and the battle outside was reaching a fever pitch. Reed realized that there was no safe way to disable the network from the outside. The only way to ensure the system was destroyed without causing widespread mental collapse was for someone to interface directly with the core, manually guiding the shutdown process. But the process would be lethal for whoever attempted it. Without hesitation, Reed made his choice. He ordered his team to hold off the Council's forces for as long as they could. Then, he stepped forward, connecting himself to the network. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but Reed fought through it, his mind racing as he navigated the intricacies of the system. He saw the lives of billions flashing before him, their thoughts and memories intertwined with the Council's control. With a final surge of willpower, Reed initiated the shutdown sequence. The system began to unravel, the chains that had bound so many minds for so long breaking apart one by one. But the strain was too much for Reed's body to bear. As the last connections dissolved, Reed collapsed, his life extinguished in the process. His sacrifice had ensured that the galaxy would be free, but at the cost of his own life. The moment the network went down, chaos erupted across the Council's territories. Their fleets, once controlled with ruthless efficiency, fell into disarray as the soldiers and commanders regained their free will. Confusion and rebellion spread like wildfire. The Council's armies collapsed from within, unable to maintain their grip on the galaxy without the network's influence. The oppressed species, long held in check by the mind control system, rose up in defiance, overthrowing their former rulers. Humanity's role in the galaxy changed overnight. Once seen as an upstart species, defying the might of the Council, they were now hailed as liberators. Reed's name became legendary, a symbol of resistance and sacrifice. His story was told across countless worlds, inspiring others to fight for their own freedom. Humanity had struck back, not just with force, but with a vision of a future where no species would ever again be subjected to such control. With the Council defeated, the galaxy entered a new era. Freed from the invisible chains of the mind control network, the species of the galaxy began to rebuild. New alliances were formed based not on fear or subjugation, but on mutual respect and cooperation. Humanity, once fighting for its survival, now stood at the forefront of this new galactic order, a beacon of hope in the aftermath of the Council's reign. The legacy of Captain Alexander Reed lived on, not just in the hearts of those he had freed, but in the new world he had helped create. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the age of oppression had ended, and a new era of unity and freedom had begun.